Some journeys start long before you board a plane. For Devin, this flight wasn't just about the destination. It was about facing a challenge he had encountered more times than he cared to remember. A simple seat, a quiet moment, and then the question, would he let himself be overlooked, or would he hold his ground? Where are you watching from today? Share with us in the comments. We love hearing from you. The airport buzzed with activity. The sharp sound of high heels against the smooth tiles, voices blending into a sea of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter, and the unmistakable smell of coffee and jet fuel filling the air. Devin navigated through the crowd with ease, his posture relaxed, yet his gaze sharp. Years of experience had taught him to pick up on the subtle cues. Who watched, who ignored, who assumed. At the first-class gate, he handed over his boarding pass. The woman behind the counter, dressed in the airline's crisp blue uniform, hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking between his pass and his face. He recognized that hesitation. He'd seen it countless times. But she quickly masked it with a forced smile, scanned his ticket, and motioned for him to proceed. On board, the air was cooler, tinged with the scent of leather from the plush seats and the sterile freshness of recirculated air. He found his seat, settled in, and took a deep breath. The weight of the world was always on his shoulders, but for now, he could forget it for a few hours. Then a shadow fell over him. A man tall, well-built, with graying hair and an expensive watch, stood beside him. The air of entitlement radiated from him, his stance confident, bordering on arrogant. "You're sitting in my seat," the man said, his voice sharp, annoyed. Devin glanced at his ticket, then back at the man. "No, I'm not." Before the man could argue further, a flight attendant appeared. She wore a polite, yet firm smile. "Sir, would you mind changing seats? There's been a mistake in the booking, and this gentleman holds priority status," she explained. There was again that same unwelcome assumption, that same invisible pressure, as though he didn't belong here. Devin took a slow breath, steadying himself. "I paid for this seat. I'm not moving," he replied. The attendant's smile flickered, and something in her eyes shifted. Other passengers glanced over, some pretending not to notice. This was a moment, and Devin knew all too well how these moments typically played out. But not today. The tension in the cabin grew thicker, hanging in the air like the calm before a storm. The attendant, still forcing her professional smile, signaled to another crew member. Moments later, a younger, more eager attendant arrived. His posture was too stiff, his voice too calm, as if he thought his authority alone would settle the matter. "Sir, we really need you to move," the younger attendant said, his voice carrying an almost forced patience. "There's a system for priority passengers, and this seat wasn't meant for you." Devin met his gaze, his face a mask of composure. He had been through this routine before, different faces, same old script. But something felt different this time, especially with the man standing next to them, smirking with arms crossed, as if he already knew how this would play out. "I paid for this seat," Devin said, voice calm but firm. "It's mine." The older man scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Come on, don't make a scene." A few passengers glanced over, some shifting in their seats, unsure whether to get involved or stay out of it. The first attendant, her patience running thin, added, "We can offer you a seat in business class. It's still a premium service." Devin almost smiled. The language of power was always so polite when it sought to push someone aside. His hand brushed against the phone resting in his lap. One call, that was all it would take. He knew exactly who to call, who would make everyone sit up straighter and regret every word that had been said. But he didn't act just yet. "Final warning," the younger attendant said, his voice sharpening. "If you don't move, we may have to escalate this." Devin smiled slowly, his eyes steady, and lifted the phone to his ear. "Go ahead," he said, voice smooth and controlled. "Let's escalate." Before the phone had time to ring, a voice answered on the other end, calm, authoritative, and steady. Devin didn't need to explain much, just a name, a flight number, and a simple, "It's happening again." That was all. As he lowered the phone, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. The attendants exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier confidence now fading. They had expected resistance, maybe even irritation, but not this. This quiet assurance that Devon was not a man to be dismissed. The passengers who had been pretending not to notice now openly watched. Whispers spread, their curiosity outpacing their discomfort. The man beside him, the supposed priority passenger, was growing visibly impatient. His foot tapped rapidly on the floor, and his arms tightened across his chest. "This is insane," he muttered under his breath, just loud enough to be heard by those nearby. It didn't take long. The first attendant's earpiece buzzed. She pressed a hand to it, her face growing more rigid as she listened. Then, without another word, she turned and hurried toward the cockpit. The second attendant, the one who had been so certain of his authority moments ago, now seemed uncertain. "Sir, if you could just—" he began, but a sharp voice cut through the air. "Everyone, please remain seated. We will be delaying takeoff for a moment." Passengers exchanged glances. Delays weren't unusual, but this felt different. There was a tension in the pilot's voice, an urgency that made it clear something more was going on. Then came the true shift. A man in a sharp blue suit strode down the aisle, moving with brisk, purposeful steps. He wasn't a flight attendant or a regular airport employee. He was someone of greater authority. His name tag caught the light above, and his presence alone caused the two attendants to instinctively step back, as though they'd been caught in something they couldn't control. His eyes locked onto Devon, sharp and calculating. But there was something else there too, recognition. "Mr. Devlin," the man said, his voice tight, almost forced. "I apologize for this inconvenience." A ripple of reaction ran through the cabin. People exchanged glances, murmuring, the name ringing in their minds, trying to place it. Devon tilted his head slightly, his expression calm and measured. "A misunderstanding?" he repeated, his voice cool. The man in the suit, perhaps a mid-level manager, someone tasked with cleaning up messes but not with stopping them, cleared his throat nervously. "This is not how we operate. I sincerely apologize. I assure you, the staff involved will be dealt with accordingly." The younger flight attendant's face drained of color, and the woman beside him subtly took a step away, as if distancing herself from the fallout. Devon exhaled slowly, his fingers brushing the armrest of his seat. "Interesting," he said, his tone even, "because it seemed pretty deliberate to me." The manager flinched at the implication. "Sir, I assure you." Devon raised a hand, silencing him. The whispers among the passengers grew louder, the soft hum of phones being drawn out of pockets, cameras flashing, capturing the moment. The looming presence of social media made everything feel like it was on display. The manager took notice too. He straightened his tie and tried to salvage the situation before it spiraled any further. "Please allow me to handle this personally, Mr. Devlin," he said. "We will ensure your experience here is satisfactory." Devon shifted in his seat, finally turning to face the man who had tried to claim his spot. "Still think this is ridiculous?" Devon asked, his voice calm, almost amused. The man shifted in place, uncomfortably. "I didn't know who you were," he muttered. Devon smiled, a tight, knowing smile. "But that's exactly the point, isn't it?" The man's mouth opened and closed, his face turning red with embarrassment. Before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. The captain had emerged from the cockpit, his uniform immaculate, his expression unreadable. He glanced briefly at the manager, then at Devon, and nodded once. "This situation has been escalated," the captain declared, his voice firm and carrying. "Effective immediately, the current flight crew will be relieved of their duties for this flight." A wave of disbelief washed over the passengers. The attendants stiffened, their faces paling. The manager nodded solemnly. "Your seats will remain as they are, Mr. Devlin." As for the staff, his eyes flicked toward the two attendants, his disappointment evident. "We'll be making adjustments." Devon could feel the atmosphere shifting again. The whispers in the cabin now carried a different tone. Approval, vindication. He leaned back in his seat, releasing a slow breath. He had seen too many injustices swept under the rug, too many moments like this end with nothing but empty apologies. But today the weight had fallen on the right shoulders. The attendants collected their belongings in stunned silence. The man who had tried to take Devon's seat now stared straight ahead, avoiding eye contact. Then, a voice from a few rows behind spoke up, hesitant but strong. "Good for you, man." Another voice followed. "Yeah, about time someone stood their ground." A woman in business attire lifted her phone, her fingers moving quickly on the screen. "This is blowing up," she murmured, barely audible. Devin didn't need to check his phone. He knew how these things spread. The world was watching. As he walked through the terminal, knowing that eyes were on him, he understood something for sure. This wasn't just about him. It never had been. This was about every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. And today, at least for one brief moment, justice had found its place. This is just one example of the daily struggles people face. Judged, dismissed, and told they don't belong. But today, the ending was different. Have you ever found yourself in a situation like this? Have you ever been treated unfairly simply because of how you look or where you come from? Share your experience in the comments. Your voice matters, and together, we can make sure no one has to stand alone. If you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. There's always more to uncover, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.